Hi. Well, today we're working on modern Dresden, and we're going to put the borders on this particular project today. So stick with us and we'll go through that right after this. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi there, welcome back. I'm so glad you could join me today as we're working on the Modern Dresden project. And as you see, I have not gotten this fourth circle back in the center of this yet because I was working on some other projects, and that's pretty typical here in the studio, where I'm either working on something I've already started, trying to progress it along or finish it up, but I'm also thinking of new ideas for our next projects. So today we're going to put the border on this one, and I'll get that done before we meet again. So let me bring you up to date on a couple of things. I did have to cut 2 more strips of our black and white fabric to get some more material and some squares for our border. Right now, I have 4 strips completed, and now I don't remember how many were in here. I know that, let's see, these are the, nope, I've got 1 strip, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 25. I've got 1 strip with 25. And then I've got 3 strips with what looks like 24. Yes. So we know we're going to have to add more squares to those. And I've got a couple little bits and pieces here. I've got this one ready, this little section ready to cut out, and then I've got some singles, and then I've got a strip of extra material. So we're going to just get started a bit, and then we'll go from there. Now, this project is supposed to be 25 inches. Let's see just how accurate we are. And we're not. Let's see. But that was 25 finished inches, wasn't it? So we are a little bit off. Looks like, let me get my other, well, I say we're off. We're not off. It measures 25.5 inches. Well, when you take that 1/4 inch seam on each side, now we're down to 25, which is where we would expect to be. So now we need to figure out how to put the 25-inch row on. And I think that what we're going to do is we're going to mark this where the halfway mark is. We're going to mark the square that's halfway, because the halfway mark in the fabric isn't really halfway. You know, we talked a little bit about seam allowances and pressing things, and how the way you press it may affect the way that it sizes out. And I think that's the situation here, that we've got so many seams that even being off 1 thread length on each seam could make a significant difference. So what we've done is I've marked the center square here, and then I've gone in and marked the center of that center square, and I'm just going to check it here. You see the pin there and the measurement, and I'm right there on that 1/2 inch. So then I'm going to try to get this in here so we've got a couple of different views of it. We're going to put that pin mark right here on this center seam, and I'm going to put 2 pins in, 1 on each side of it, before I take, well, the pin took itself out. And then we're going to bring this over, and what we're going to do is we're going to have the end of this fabric match up to the end of this fabric. And that's going to require that we stretch it a little bit, because those seams, even though we iron them and press them so that they're completely open, sometimes they don't stay open. They have a little bit of a memory problem. And we're going to trim off this long black thread here, because one thing I can tell you with working with a lot of quilts with white backgrounds and white backing fabrics is if you have a white fabric and it has threads from different colors underneath it, they will show up. Okay, so we've put this at the end, and I'm actually going to pin in both squares here at the end to keep it even. And then I'm going to make sure that the checkerboard lays flat, which means we're going to stretch it a little bit, and we're going to pin it in the middle. And we're actually going to give this a few pins because we are having to ease it in a bit. And that will help us when we're sewing not to have to pull on it so hard. One side seems to be just a smidgen longer than the other. A little more room there. And we're making sure that it's lined up, both pieces at the edge of the fabric. So let me show you that, since we had a little bit of confusion. I don't know if we'll need that again or not. So here it is, pinned on, and we've pinned right sides together. So we're ready to sew. And we're going to sew this. I need to reset my machine for the 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to use 2.4, which I think we've used for most everything in this. And I'm going to bring it over a little bit so I don't have to stretch quite so much to get to it. Oops. And we're just going to sew a seam right down the edge of that. We want to make sure that we are capturing all of the seams in that checkerboard so that if they're pressed down one way, we get them sewn down that same way, and we don't let them flip-flop over, because what will happen is that dark fabric will show underneath the white. The only way to make that not happen is after you sew it, you'd have to go in and clip that fabric so it could fold back over under, and you'd have a lot of raw ends underneath your quilt top. Okay, so we're going to go, and I'm going to sew this along, and I'll probably speed up this section so it doesn't take quite as long. Okay, that was really quite simple. I did it a little slower than I would do a regular straight stitch, and I made sure that all of the seam allowance were in the right direction. And then just to make this simple, we're just going to press this checkerboard to the colored side fabric. And this is what we're going to get. And that's going to all be sewn. We're going to press that down. So that's pretty simple. Now we're going to turn the corner, and I'm going to turn the corner, whoops, get it flat. I'm going to turn the corner here. And the one thing I do want to make sure of is that we get that seam pressed nicely. I don't like to press on my cutting board because it tends to make them warp. But I have found that if I have something small, I could either bring this pressing board over, or I could just stick a pad of paper underneath it for something small like this, just to get it flat enough that we can move forward. Now, I do find that if I'm doing something like this, my regular size iron works better because it gets hotter and it gives me a little bit of steam. Okay, so we're ready to turn the corner. I'm going to have to move that back a little bit because this piece we're going to put on is going to have to be bigger. And it's going to have to be at least 2 squares bigger than the one we had, and the one we had just barely fit. And remember, we had 1 that fit and then 3 that were 1 short. So we're going to need 1 square to get us to the edge of the blue fabric, and then 2 squares to get us to the end. And we're going to do a quick little check. Here's the center. But remember, our center is not our center, so this is going to be right about here. This is not accurate. We're just checking my math. So we'll stretch that out. That'll be that. And then we'll need 1, 2, and 1. So I think 3 will do it. We don't want to extend on the other end. This is kind of like putting together a log cabin quilt. We're going to start with the first end even with where we started and end up even. And then the next row is going to start where the new strip ended and go down all the way to the end of this one. So we're going to need 3 more. I've got, this is going to be 4, so that's too many. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video right here. I'm going to get 3 sewn together, and I'll be right back and we'll add those on. Okay, I wanted to show you something. Now, when we talked before, when we first started making the borders and the checkerboard, remember I said don't make them too long. Cut them a little bit, or assemble them a little bit shorter than the 25 inches you needed. And this one is 24. And a moment ago I said we need 3 more squares to turn the corner. So I'm going to put together 3. Well, I started laying this out in how it needs to go together. And I only need 2 on this end and 1 on the other end to make it turn the corner. Because had I put 3 together, where's my other one? Had I assembled 3 and tried to hook this strip to it, you can see here that we've doubled up. If we flip it over, we've still doubled up. The way we solve that is to only hook 2 for the corner and then sew those together. And the third one will go on the other end. And my guess is we're going to have to do that for every corner. And that's why I suggested that you not make them too long. It's easier to sew another pair of these little blocks on than to have to rip it out. Especially the way we've assembled these, because we have some seams that are pressed to one side and we have some seams that are pressed open. So it just gets a little bit confusing. So I'm going to hook these 2 on this end and this one on this end, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're ready to hook this on. And the way I'm going to do this is I am going to hook the 2 pieces at the end on first, because I can line up the seam with where the blue fabric ends and where that block there begins. I'll give you a close-up in just a second. So I've got these 2 on the end, or our corner. We've got that pinned. And see, I've got this seam right here where these two meet matched up with where the white and the blue meet on the other side. So those are on properly. And then we can take and fold back to that seam, and I can tell the white here is the one in the middle. I'm going to put a pin there. So I can bring that right in the middle, and we are going to check. I guessed in the middle. How about that? And then I'm going to pin these pieces so that we've lined up that center of that block with the blue seam between the green and the blue. And then we should be able to take this last end over here. Remember, we added one block on that end, and we're going to line it up with the edge of the fabric. And we will have to ease that in a little bit because our border wanted to compress on us. So I just stretch it till it matches, and that will help us get that in place. I'll put some pins in, particularly where I need to make sure that seam holds down. You can really see it here. Now we're not stretching the green fabric, we're stretching the black and white checkerboard to meet the green fabric, because we know that was just no seams, so it should be on the money. And then we're going to need to do the same thing over here. And you know what I'm going to do? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 25. I just want to make sure we had the right count, because it does look like we're having to stretch a good little bit. And I think this probably goes into the category of accurate seams, and how that one little thread width over 25 seams can make a big difference. I think if I did this again and I wanted to use, let's say in this case, a 1-inch finished checkerboard, instead of cutting them at 1.5, I would probably cut them 2 little marks on my ruler larger, so I wouldn't have to fiddle with this quite as much. And it's really hard to talk when you're trying to stretch this and pin it too. It's like 3 activities your brain is trying to do at one time. Okay, let's see. I think we can put a pin here, and that may do it. So if I were doing this, let's see, that's not a good example of a ruler. Here's a good one. So if I were to cut again, instead of cutting at 1.5, I would probably cut at 1 5/8 to give it just a little bit more room. And then any small discrepancy that I had in sewing it at 1/4 inch would not be such a big deal. I think if you get any bigger than that, you're going to see where they're off sizes, and you're really going to be able to tell from one square to the other. They're so close together that you want to keep it as consistent as you can. So now we've got that pinned on all the way down, and we're going to have to give this a slight little tug when we sew it. And I'm going to pull this closer to me. One of the things I've found most difficult in trying to sew and film is getting the machine comfortable for me to sew and also film the video. So bear with me, please, as I work through that today. I'm going to adjust this pin at the end. It looks like it's wants to kind of take off on us there. Okay. And we should be good to go. I cleaned up in here the other day and all of my little fabric scraps have disappeared in the trash can, so we're just going to keep our fingers crossed that we don't get a bird's nest here. I think we're okay. Get one back stitch. It does want to give us a lot of stitches there. Let's try this. It's a little bigger. And we're just going to put that in there and try to help us. There we go. It's like an extra finger in there, but it's a finger that doesn't require a hospital trip if you sew the needle through it. Okay, so we're going now. We're going to keep this seam as even as we can. We're going to slow that down a little bit. We're going to apply some pressure just to keep that fabric in the checkerboard taut and not allow it to draw up. And that's what we call easing in. We're trying to get one piece of fabric that's just a little smaller to stretch just a little bit to match the other fabric. Got a little buckle there. For the most part, I can leave these pins in. The only challenge is getting them to run underneath that little guard. And sometimes they want to get stuck, so we just lift the foot with the needle down, and that allows them to pop into place. Okay, we're almost there. And it is getting a little bit exciting because we're going to see our border here. The ones I did not pin down, I'm using the little awl using it as a stiletto to push those pieces of fabric down so they don't get folded in the wrong place when they're sewn. Okay, and let's take out that last pin. I'm going to give it a little lock stitch there at the end. Okay, let's take out the pins and see how we're doing. Okay, let's see. That's all of our pins. Let's slide that out the way and see what we have now. Lovely. Now, all it needs is a good press. Still puckered up a little bit from the no press earlier. But there we go. We've got our checkerboard on two sides now. And we need to press it, and you can choose whether you want to press it open or press it to one side. I think for the most part I would press it towards the blue. I think that'll give you a smoother appearance. But we've turned that corner, and we did have to do it in a more of a customized manner. We got one on, then we looked at our next piece that we have pre-made and decided where it needed to be positioned. And I can tell you from this next one that we're going to have the same situation. We're going to have to put a little block here to match these up. And that's also going to need some coaxing. I think when we press this, we'll press it and pull it just a little bit to straighten it out. It looks like it wants to curve a little bit. But that next strip will help keep that in place. So we're going to probably put four little blocks here so we can make that turn. And it's very likely that we'll need one set of blocks here at the other end, just like we did the second one. And then the fourth and final side will be done exactly the same way, but you will probably need the 4 in the corner where they're meeting at the beginning, and then you'll need 3 on this end. 1 to finish the size of the side, and then 2 to make that second turn. But that's how that's done, and you can see the look that that gives us of that checkerboard all the way around. And I'm very happy with it. When I had it pinned up on the wall and my husband and I were discussing, to me it looked initially like this was a little too close in to the black and white here. But getting it on it, I think, and once we get it pressed, I think it's going to be just about right. I was thinking that we needed a little bit more of the blue and green fabric. And if you agree with that, it's very simple to make a change. Just cut your square an extra 1.5 inches, an extra inch bigger, because we've already figured in the seam allowances. So if you cut it 1 inch bigger, you'll just need one more set of blocks. And it should work out all the same way. You could go 2 inches bigger and then you need 2 more sets of blocks. But be sure that you cut that before you put the plates on, because you need the square the size it's going to be so you can figure out where the center is. This to me has a little bit of a, oh, my mind just went blank. And I was just talking about this yesterday. Warhol. It has a little Warhol-ish look to it with the 4 squares and the different colors. You know, he had a famous work of art that was similar to that, and it gives me a little bit of thought to that. It's also very modern. For some reason it looks British to me, and I think it has to do with the checkerboard and the black and white. We had our battery die, we had to fix that. So I'm back, and just want to wrap this up now. We talked a little bit about how we're putting these borders on and how you would need to finish the last 2 sides. It's exactly the way I showed you here with these 2 and how they matched up in the corner. We talked a little bit about if you wanted your squares bigger, how you would do that. So from here, my homework is to get the other 2 borders on, which you can see from this video I don't think will take very long, and now that I know how many I need, I can go ahead and get them ready. So they're ready to go. I'm going to press it, sew the circle on, and then start prepping my binding. And my binding, I have made a little change. I was going to do a little fine black and white polka dot, but I think that this is busy enough, and I'm going to do a black solid binding, and it's going to be a small binding, probably 1/2 inch at the most, maybe a little bit smaller. So I'm going to be working on all those things. When we come back next time, the top will be completely finished. More than likely, I'll already have it sandwiched with its backing, and we will be either preparing the binding or putting on the binding, the machine part of putting on the binding. So we're just about finished. We can see the finish line, get the pun, in the near future. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you liked it and it showed you something helpful that you can use in your sewing, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Have a great week.